All right, welcome everyone. Today we are pulling back the curtain on a book that literally shapes millions of lives. But, most people have never actually read it. We're talking about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5-TR. This is the absolute core manual for pretty much every mental health professional out there. Okay, let's get right into it. So, let me just start with a quick question for you. What do you think is the single most influential book in the entire world when it comes to mental health? And no, it's not some self-help bestseller or an ancient philosophical text. It's this manual, the DSM. And honestly, understanding how it works is the key to understanding all of modern psychiatry and psychology.
So here's how we're going to break it all down in this explainer. First, we'll talk about the big problem it solves, the need for everyone to speak the same language. Then we're going to look at the actual building blocks of a diagnosis and see how clinicians put them together. After that, we'll get into how this manual is always changing, always evolving. And finally, we'll tie it all together and talk about why this book is so important, not just in the clinic, but for all of us. Okay, first up, the professional's language. So what problem does the DSM actually solve? Well, to put it simply, before this manual existed, psychiatric diagnosis was kind of a mess. You had different schools of thought using completely different terms, which made communication and, of course, research incredibly difficult. You see, at its very core, the DSM's main job is to fix one huge problem: communication. Its number one virtue is creating a common language. What that means is a psychologist in Chicago, a psychiatrist in London, and a researcher in Tokyo can all use the exact same terms for the exact same condition. It ensures everybody is on the same page all across the globe. And let me tell you, this manual is not gathering dust on a shelf. That 70 plus you see right there, that's how many disorders had their descriptions modified in the latest 2022 text revision, the DSM-5-TR. It's a living document, constantly adapting to new science to make sure its language reflects our most current understanding. Okay, so we've got the common language, but what is that language actually made of? Let's peel back the layers and look at the real building blocks of a diagnosis. How is this whole system put together?
Right at the heart of the DSM, you have what's called diagnostic criteria. This is basically a specific list of symptoms and rules, like how long they have to last and in what context, that all have to be met to make a diagnosis. But, and this is absolutely crucial, it is not just a simple checklist. The manual is very clear that making a diagnosis requires clinical judgment. You can't just tick off boxes. This is a tool meant for trained professionals.
Let's make this real with an example, say for ADHD. The criteria don't just list symptoms like difficulty sustaining attention. They also get super specific about the conditions. For instance, a bunch of the symptoms have to have been there before the person was 12 years old. And they have to cause real problems in at least 2 different places, like at home and at school. It's that level of detail that makes these criteria such a rigorous tool.
But wait, there's more. It doesn't even stop there. Clinicians also use things called specifiers. Think of these like little tags or modifiers that add really crucial detail and nuance. They're not totally new diagnoses, but they help paint a much clearer picture of what that specific person is going through. So for example, someone might be diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Okay, but by adding the specifier with anxious distress, a clinician immediately shares a critical piece of the puzzle, that anxiety is a really big feature of this person's depression. That one tiny detail can completely change the game for their treatment plan. And finally, all these different disorders are organized into chapters based on what they have in common. So for example, ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, they're both grouped under neurodevelopmental disorders. PTSD is filed under trauma and stress-related disorders. This structure isn't just for neatness. It helps clinicians navigate the whole system and consider other related diagnoses. So we've got the language, we've got the building blocks, but how do clinicians actually put it all together? Well, that brings us to the process of forming a diagnosis. Let's take a look inside the clinician's thought process. The manual really stresses that a diagnosis is just one part of a bigger process called a clinical case formulation. It's like a multi-step investigation. First, the clinician gathers a super detailed history. Then, they pull together and summarize all the different factors: social, psychological, biological. Only then do they apply the diagnostic criteria, using their expert clinical judgment. The final goal isn't just to slap on a label, it's to create a comprehensive treatment plan that's tailored to that unique individual. Clinicians also have these specific terms for the status of a diagnosis. The principal diagnosis is pretty straightforward. It's the main reason someone came in for help. But what happens if they're not totally sure yet? That's where a provisional diagnosis comes in. It means they have a really strong hunch, but they just need more information, maybe from family or old records to be 100% certain. It's a smart way of recognizing that uncertainty while still moving forward with care.
Now, like I mentioned earlier, this manual is not some ancient text carved in stone. It is constantly evolving. So let's dive into how it adapts over time, responding to big shifts in both science and in society. When you look back, the evolution is just fascinating. The very first DSM, back in 1952, saw mental disorders as reactions to what was happening in a person's life. Now, fast forward to 2013, and the DSM-5 introduces a whole new model for continuous, ongoing updates. And then, in 2022, the DSM-5-TR put that model into action, adding a brand new diagnosis for prolonged grief disorder and revising text all over the place based on a decade of new research. And one of the most significant changes, a really big deal in the latest revision, is its direct focus on social context. For the first time ever, the DSM-5-TR introduced sections that directly address how things like culture, racism, and discrimination can impact a diagnosis. This is a major, major step toward making the whole system more aware and more equitable.
And the manual itself does not pull any punches. Listen to this quote from it. It acknowledges that systemic racism can be embedded in the everyday practices of institutions, including psychiatry itself. The manual now actually guides clinicians to actively recognize and address all forms of racism and bias in their work. That is a profound shift in the field's official framework. So, we've gone through the nuts and bolts, but what's the big takeaway? Why does any of this matter? Well, in our final section, we're going to connect this manual's huge influence from inside the clinic to society as a whole. The impact of this one book is just immense. It guides the treatment decisions for millions and millions of people. It provides the standardized framework that makes serious mental health research even possible. Its diagnostic codes influence everything from whether your insurance will cover treatment to public health policy. And maybe most importantly, it shapes the very words we use to understand and talk about mental health in our culture. Which leaves us with one final big question to think about. The DSM is a tool for classification, right? It's for creating order out of complex human suffering. But how does the very act of classifying our experiences, of putting them into boxes and giving them names, change how we and how others understand them? It's something worth thinking about. Thanks for tuning in.